I just got out of the restroom, and let me tell you, you better not go in there for at least 30 minutes. I sprayed and I lit a match and it did nothing. But this is Pop Reads, and I'm reading you again from the book of Carolla. In 50 years, we'll all be chicks. Last time we read about how we built ourselves a society of minimum wage, and we're putting ourselves in a minimum wage gilded cage. This time we talk about the airport. 2010, but I believe it's probably gotten worse since then, so let's just get right on into it. Airport 2010. The airport simultaneously represents all that is right with our society and all that is wrong with it. The idea that I can be standing in front of myself, flushing urinal, evacuating my bladder with a gent to my right expelling a Diet Coke he may have consumed on another continent, while the sweet scent of Cinnabon wafts the air of both our noses is nothing short of miraculous. Not to mention the most well-lit 400 square feet on the plane, the duty-free shop, and, well, its 30-gallon Grey Goose bottles, oil drum size containers of Chanel No. 5, and brick of Toblerone in the window. Take that, terrorists. The airport is also a metaphor for why this country works. People of all shapes and sizes from all parts of the globe put things aside, their religious and cultural differences, for the common goal of getting drunk on a plane. There, I've completed my paragraph about what's good about the airport. Now, I can dedicate the next 13 pages to why it sucks. Airports are one big rule followed by a pile of regulations. If you're not showing your ID, removing an article of clothing, or being patted down, there's still a very good chance that somebody in uniform will be telling you you can't stand here or park there or leave your bag anywhere. Unless you're a fat guy in black Reeboks with a vest and a camera. Then you have run of the airport. I was walking through LAX and there was a guy from TMZ with a camera on his shoulder walking backwards, filming me. Weaving his way through a maze of wheeled luggage and weary travelers, I thought this guy is one baggage handler tying his shoe away from killing himself and taking out 3 Asians along the way. A moment on the paparazzi. Why are these douchebags able to exist? How can they profit off celebrities without their consent? When we used to do a man on the street bit on the Man Show, we were not allowed to air footage of anyone who didn't sign a release form. And when we did Crank Yankers, we couldn't air even the voices of the people we called without them signing a release form. And when I was on the radio, we couldn't do a March Madness bit because the name March Madness was copyrighted. Thus, Mad Marchness was born. If Harvey Levin was a watchmaker, do you think he would have just take a picture of George Clooney, Photoshop his watch onto his wrist, and use it for advertising? Of course not. You'd have to pay Clooney millions of dollars for that. But you can run a website, a TV show, or a magazine, all for profit using nothing but celebrities who don't give consent to use their images, and there's not a law on the books that would fall under it. Oh, let's listen to this dipshit next door be loud. Alright. Now let's get back to the book. Where was I at? All for profit. The celebrities don't give consent to use their images, and there's not a law on the books that would fall under. Any sane person who had ever even a cursory understanding of our society and its laws would have to admit this should be illegal. So, then why does it remain legal? One answer, nobody feels sorry for celebrities. However, I believe that's not true anymore. I know it seems too simple and not technical enough, but that's the bottom line. That's the only reason this is allowed to continue. If there was Hopi Indians instead of Halle Berry, not only would they think you're stealing their soul, but the public outcry would be deafening. The map of the stars' homes is another example of a clear breach of privacy. If you ever visit Hollywood for $10, you can buy a map of the stars' homes. For $24, you can buy a fifth of Jose Cuervo, and for $30, you can buy a hunting knife and finish the job. Whose idea was it to let these paparazzi jack-offs, most of whom have extensive criminal backgrounds, or are at least deadbeat dads, have a retarded fat guy panty raid in the same place where they strip search old women and force guys like me to empty the contents of toiletry bags into the garbage? Am I the only one who thinks a bunch of guys who have no business at the airport shouldn't be allowed in the airport? Ironically, if one of these guys left the airport and decided to film the Brooklyn Bridge instead of Renee Zellweger, he'd be arrested. Couldn't we just make one more rule in a place where if you light up a cigarette in a bathroom, you're dragged out in leg irons? The only people allowed at the airport are the people who have business at the airport. Dear a-hole naysayer who thinks telling these guys they can't be at the airport is tantamount to wiping my ass with one of the founding fathers' wigs. This airport is already a civil liberties free zone. I can't make a joke about shooting people with Osama bin Laden without being arrested, and I have to pass through a machine that's manned by a $9 an hour guy who gets a front row seat to my botched circumcision. Of course, all this security would be necessary if we'd just start doing what everyone secretly wants to do anyway. Profiling. We've turned profiling into a dirty word, sort of like what the English did with cigarettes. We never stopped talking about profiling and why it shouldn't be tolerated in our society. The problem is, as humans, we can no sooner stop profiling than we can stop our fingernails from growing or our cells from multiplying. It's woven into our DNA. When you walk down the street and you see a dog coming towards you, you immediately begin to proceed the process of profiling. It is a Labrador or it is a Rottweiler. My holier-than-thou friends to the left would argue that since I don't know either one of these individual dogs personally, I should refrain from judgment. But we all know that the statistical likelihood of a Labrador attacking us is less than a Rottweiler. I'll bet you if the guy in the Birkenstock with the Free Tibet bumper sticker on his Honda Insight was taking his teacup poodle for a walk and saw the Rottweiler, he'd cross to the other side of the street. Yet, when it comes to security, we're supposed to throw away the most important tool we have in the fight against terrorism. It's not racial profiling, it's including race as part of the profile, just like age, gender, weight, etc. My cruel fantasy is that one of these assholes who rail against profiling as a crime-fighting tool to get his kid abducted, then when he sits down with the FBI profiler, the guy says, according to our data, there's a 90% chance your daughter was abducted by a white male between the ages of 38 and 52 who lives within a 2-mile radius of your home and has some previous relationship with little Cindy. Oh, wait a minute, I've just noticed your name is on the list of assholes who've taken a bullshit showboating stance against profiling. Well, now that's different. Instead of going up the street and questioning the 47-year-old unemployable loner who drives the primered van, we're going to have to talk to everyone in the city. The other statistic we've learned in our profiling is that there is usually a 48-hour window before the search turns into a recovery. But we're going to waste a whole shitload of time talking about it to people who obviously didn't commit this crime so that we don't hurt the feelings of a few. And speaking of a blanket policy that makes no sense, I was at the Phoenix airport in 2008 coming back from shooting the Top Gear pilot and decided to go into the bar and order a round for the guys I was traveling with. The bar was empty except for one heavyset, gray-bearded, grizzled guy who looked like he just rode his donkey into town after a long day of panning for silver in them thar hills. He ordered a Jack Daniels straight up, and that's when I overheard the young guy with the earring behind the bar asking Charlie Daniels if he had an ID. At first, the old sea captain just laughed. He probably hadn't been carded since he was trying to join the Merchant Marine in World War II, but the guy with the twinkle in his ear asked again. At this point, it became apparent that he was serious. Dan Haggerty's dad fired back. "You've got to be shitting me, son." The bartender replied, "New policy. Everyone has to show their ID. No ID, no drinks." Then I watched Burl Ives reluctantly reach into his dungarees and pull out his ID. That may sound like nothing to you, but I saw it as a very sad testament of our times, and also an eerie harbinger of what the future holds. Obviously, this is corporate lawyering at its worst. I was carded myself leaving Burbank Airport a few days earlier. The guy said, "Hey, man show. I used to love watching that. Now let me see your driver's license." Does he think I shot the Man Show when I was 14? No, he knows I'm twice the legal age. It's just some asshole who went to law school decided to take the ability to make decisions away from the poor effer who makes the Bloody Marys. On the other hand, I could be wrong. Maybe the old man at the Phoenix airport was in reality a local teen with a diabolical plan that involved purchasing an airline ticket and 7 hours in a makeup chair having prosthetics applied for the opportunity to spend $11 on a well drink. And the legal insanity doesn't stop once you get on the plane. As soon as your ass hits this seat, you hear the familiar refrain, tampering with, disabling, or destroying the laboratory smoke detectors is against FAA regulations. I have this fantasy where sometime after tampering and before disabling, I spring to my feet and yell, "Shut the F up. You just said tampering, you're covered. You certainly don't need the disabling, and we sure as F don't need the destroying part of your retarded soliloquy. You've somehow managed to make the Sky Mall catalog a rich and compelling alternative to your flight cabin State of the Union. Nice work, Toastmaster." Was there an incident that necessitated this run-on sentence about the smoke detector? Was there a case 15 years ago when a Pan Am flight where a guy went into the first class had lit up a butt and took an axe handle to the smoke detector, and his case had to be thrown out of federal court because his dream team argued the stewardess only said tampering with? Then in fact my client disabled and destroyed the smoke detector, and thus no jury in the land would convict him. I know it seems trivial, but someone's got to point out every droplet in this ocean of time-wasting legal bullshit. The next tale is another condemnation of attorneys and what they force the airlines to do. I was flying back from a college gig in Florida and sitting in first class attempting to get drunk when I realized we hadn't moved in an hour. I looked up and found out that the problem was, it was an overhead storage compartment, the latch was broken, and the spring-loaded door kept raising on its own. The flight attendant said we couldn't take off until all overhead compartments were securely closed. At this point I said, "Why don't you just take the luggage out of it? That way nothing can fall on anyone's head and we can take off." She replied, "Oh, it's empty." I said, "Fine, then let's take off." Now I get the answer that's prefaced with, Sir, we can't take off until the overhead bin is securely closed." I again point out that it is empty and that the law is only in place to prevent Samsonite from crushing midgets. She once again, but this time with a little more emphasis on the sir, tells me we can't take off until the hatch is secured. At this point I suggest holding the lid closed with a piece of duct tape. Fast forward to an hour and a half later, the maintenance guy has boarded the plane, attached the latch with a screwdriver to no avail, and finally settled on my original suggestion, duct tape. We move the ability to reason from the people who are supposed to be in charge. Of course, post 9/11, the airlines get to use safety as an excuse for all this stupidity. A quick funny story related to 9/11. I know what you're thinking. Aren't all stories related to 9/11 funny? Of course, and this one is no exception. I was flying to New York with Jimmy to do the Hugh Hefner roast. That was in September 2001, mere days after the attack, so everybody was understandably a little bit nervous. Jimmy declared at the airport that his head was on a swivel. He was ready to roll, and if he saw anyone darker than Tom Petty heading toward the cockpit, he was going to spring out of his seat, tackle him as the plane was taxiing. I put my magazine down and glanced over at Jimmy. His head was tilted back, his mouth was wide open, and he was sound asleep. Another thing I can't wrap my mind around is the fact that you can fly with your dog, but if you have more than 3 ounces of Prill, I end up on the terrorist watch list. Every time I go to the airport, there's some guy holding my toiletry bag upside down over a trash can, shaking it. Meanwhile, Paris Hilton and her menagerie stroll right past me. What the F is that? You can't bring your dog into Starbucks. Are you really allowed to bring it on the plane? It's especially unbelievable with all these allergies and the nonsense. There's got to be more people who have dog dander allergies than people with peanut allergies. But of course, no more peanuts on the plane. They've been replaced with Fiesta Mix, whatever the hell that is. Apparently, Fiesta Mix is the Spanish word for crap that tastes like ground up bouillon cube. It essentially is crushed and broken stuff from that someone swept off the floor of the Frito-Lay factory and put it into a tiny bag. This stuff doesn't even exist on the ground. Have you ever met anyone who's eaten Fiesta mix below 30,000 feet? Of course, people make the financial excuse, but is there anyone who wouldn't pay an extra 50 cents on their ticket price for real snacks? Halfway through a 6-hour flight, I'd suck a guy off for a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos. A decision that makes no sense logically or financially is the lack of sleep channel on the plane. Airlines would love it if everyone just passed out as soon as they boarded. If you get on a plane later than 9 in the evening, they immediately hand you a pillow and shut the lights. Obviously, they want you to sleep, and they program the stations that have 2 country stations, classic and contemporary rock stations, hip hop, probably even a ranchera station, but no sleep station. The closest channel they have to classical one, but even that's ineffective, just as you are nodding off to Pachelbel's Canon, a douchebag who sounds like James Lipton chimes in with a long-winded his story of the song. You've been listening to Air on the G String from Orchestra Suite Number 3 in D major by Johann Sebastian Bach. Originally written for strings and piano, it was later arranged by violinist Augustus Wilhelmje, who transposed the key of the piece from D to C major and lowered the melody by a full octave. There, Wilhelm, I don't know how to say his name, was able to play the piece solely on the G string of his violin, thus Air on the G String, a fascinating piece of musical history. I'm glad I could share it with you. You're listening to Classics in the Air. If you managed to get past the lecture about Bach and Prince Leopold without rushing the cockpit praying a sky marshal would put you out of your misery, you might attempt to drift off to the soothing Beethoven sonata only to be jarred awake by a John Philip Sousa march or some Tchaikovsky piece with cannons. Did the airlines research this? Did they hand out surveys to their frequent flyers and realize that while 19% of their patrons said they prefer to sleep on the flight, a rousing 81% said they wanted a master's level education in chamber music? What the F is wrong with these people? There's been 200 different airlines over the last 50 years and not one damn one of them has a sleeping channel on their pre-recorded radio station. Why not a channel with just light classical crickets and rainforest sounds? You'd think that a way to avoid a lot of these hassles is to cough up a first-class ticket. Very wrong. Flying first class actually makes the process longer. One of the so-called perks of paying a king's ransom for your ticket is that you get to board first. You pay more, yet you have to sit there longer. Your flight is as long as your ass is in the seat. If you get on the plane last, your flight from New York to LA is 6 hours and 5 minutes. If you're the first guy on the plane, your flight is 6 hours and 25 minutes. And there's no movie showing, there's no booze flowing, there's no stewardess blowing. It's not like you're getting a foot massage, a reach around, and a martini the whole time. The flight attendants are helping the person who paid 1/10 of the price you paid get his luggage into the overhead bin. As long as you're on the ground, you ain't in first class. You're not getting your Bloody Mary until you're at 30,000 feet. People think it's a champagne fountain up there. But what's really happening is you're getting the stink eye from the economy class passengers as they shuffle by you and whack you in the shin with their luggage. Here's what first class should be. Get me when everyone else is on the plane. Send the stewardess out to the bar to say, Mr. Carolla, we're ready to leave. What if this was a bus instead of a plane? There's nobody who would pay 10 times more for a bus ticket if he had to sit there while everyone else was loaded on. Imagine the bus driver says, because you paid $300, you get to sit on the bus and watch everyone else drag their ass on board before we leave. And by the way, this bus holds 283 people, so it's going to be a while. You'd say, F you, I'm going to the bar. Come get me when the people who paid $30 are buckled in. After you arrive at your destination, the torture continues. The first thing most people do when they get off the plane is head to the bathroom. Big mistake. From an olfactory perspective, you'd be better off heading to a porta-john at the nearest construction site. The damage done in the airport bathroom is worse than the terrorist action that could happen on the plane. What happens is those bathrooms is the work of an international all-star team of shitters. It's a combination of bad airplane food, meets nervous flyers, meets I've been holding this for 6 hours, meets who cares? No one in my country of origin will ever know about this. If it's how you treat a rental car. It's not mine. Therefore, I don't give a F. People file off the plane, see the bathroom, and think, not my home turf. Let the games begin. Then it's time to go home. The airport shuttle at best probably saves you $20 over a cab, but the cost to your time, soul, and sense of smell will never be recovered. I was in New York covering the Video Music Awards for KROQ when I got the call to come back and audition for Loveline on MTV. I was poor back then, so opted to take the shuttle to my apartment. My shuttle smelled like a burlap sack of BO had been thrown onto a hibachi. Just this whoosh of hot air and foreigner funk. Different parts of the world have different stinks. It's a curry-based diet, meaning synthetic-based rayon. They're all wearing disco shirts and their beards are down to their chests and they haven't washed their hair in 6 months. That shuttle van smelled like I walked into an asshole. There shouldn't have even been double doors. There should just have been cheeks that opened up. Of course, I'm the first guy in the van and we have to do that thing where you circumnavigate LAX 28 times to fill it. So we're doing that, circle, and I'm hanging my head out the window like a dog on country road. The other 4 or 5 couples eventually pile in. Since I was the first guy in, I felt like I was the lead man, like I was at a deli and pulled the first ticket. But no, because there's a guy whose apartment is between LAX and where I live, so we eventually drop off a couple of people and it gets down to me and the other guy. We head down the 405 and toward the 101 interchange. He lives out in Calabasas, which is 15 miles north of the 101, and I live in Sherman Oaks, which is 2 miles south. We're coming to the fork, and I realize if we veer to the left, I'm going to this guy's house in Calabasas with this smelly mother effer driving. I literally grabbed the wheel and pulled us to the right. The shuttle is the worst $20 you'll ever save. It adds 90 minutes to whatever a town car or a cab would have been. You have unbelievable choice between being dropped off last or being dropped off first and having a bunch of losers who can't afford a cab fare and have no friends or loved ones with cars knowing exactly where you live. Here's a story from the road that encapsulates all the misery associated with air travel. In the late 90s, when Dr. Drew and I would do the college circuit, often we would leave town for 4 or 5 days at a time. One evening, before a trip during a commercial break from Loveline, I suggested to Drew that we carpool to the airport. No sense in us both paying for an expensive long-term parking. I said, since you live in Pasadena and I live in Hollywood, how about you pick me up on the way to LAX? He explained that wasn't going to work because he had to go to the hospital on the way to the airport and make the rounds. I said, it's 7 a.m. flight. What time do you expect to make the rounds? He said about 5 a.m. By the way, we were having this conversation at 11:40 in the evening. This is why Dr. Drew is currently hard at work on his 9th TV show and your fat ass is sitting around reading this dumb book. Fat ass. Anyway, he suggested me sleeping over at his house that night and then waiting in the car while he made the rounds. I sarcastically asked if he was going to crack the window. It was at that point that I took one of my many retarded stands. As we came out of the commercial break, I made the proclamation that I'm not going to drive myself to the airport, and if Drew would not pick me up, then a loyal listener would. The only requirements were that you were female and had a roadworthy SUV. A young lady immediately called into the show and said she had to be at work at 6:30 in the morning, so she was up at the hour anyway, and it would be an honor to transport me and my luggage to LAX. I said great and put her on hold. I didn't want to give my address out on the air, but as I was speaking to her on the phone, I realized I didn't want to give out my address off the air either. So I told her to go up Beechwood Drive past the market, and I would meet her down at the bottom of the 1,000 stairs that connected Beechwood Canyon to the street far above it, and that she needed to be there at 5:30 sharp. Since it was almost midnight, I told her to get some sleep and I'd see her in a few hours. I then got back on the air, and before saying goodnight to the millions of troubled teens, I proudly boasted to Drew that I, in fact, would not be paying for parking at LAX. He laughed and said, good luck. I'll see you at the American Airlines terminal about 6:15. 5 hours and 8 minutes later, my alarm went off. I quickly drank my cup of coffee and pulled on a heavy overcoat since it was drizzling and cold, and grabbed my suitcase with the week's worth of underpants and socks crammed in it. I walked out of the house and up the street in the mouth of the staircase. I then dragged my heavy suitcase down the steep, dark, and wet stairs and on my way to the rendezvous with the mysterious young lady in the SUV. Using my luggage like a bar stool, I sat on the sidewalk under a streetlight with my collar pulled up, wishing it would either stop drizzling or she would arrive. I checked my watch. It read 5:37. I started to become concerned. I thought maybe I should jog down Beechwood and around the bend to see if she was waiting on the market. But then I thought, should I drag my luggage with me or should I just leave it unattended? I decided to drag it behind me. She was nowhere to be found. I'm now beginning to sweat profusely under my many layers of winter gear. I once again picked up my luggage and this time charged up the canyon to see if she was waiting at the next corner. Again, nothing. By this time I was approaching 6 a.m. I'm worried that something tragic may have happened to this kind-hearted stranger, but then quickly decided the cunt had stiffed me. I ran up the stairs. Again, these are novelty stairs, the kind that trainers send their clients' victims up and down. I threw my luggage into the trunk, jumped in the car, and hauled ass toward the airport. It was now well after 6, and the airport is at least half an hour away. I drove there like an old man drives through a farmer's market, ignoring all laws of man, nature, and God. I screeched around the corner and into the long-term parking lot about 6:42, grabbed my luggage, and sprinted towards the security line. This was pre-9/11, so I still had a chance. I made it through by about 6:53 and started scurrying down the endless terrazzo-covered corridor toward the American Airlines gate. When I arrived, I was surprised and relieved to see Dr. Drew standing at the check-in counter. I looked to the left and saw our plane was parked right behind him with the gate still hooked up. I was weak from fluid loss, but still had enough energy to... Alright, we'll continue because the battery ran out on the camera, but as I was last saying, he was weak from fluid loss, but he still had enough energy to let forth a celebrity hell yeah. And that's when I noticed Dr. Drew was arguing with the woman. Sir, the door has been shut. We can't reopen it. I found out later their on-time schedule is based on when the door's shut, not when the landing gear goes up. And since it was the first flight of the morning, it affected the entire day's schedule. I started in at the woman. It's 2 minutes to 7. The plane is parked. The jetway is still attached. Why are we standing in front of the plane arguing? This bitch was clearly not going to let us on to our plane. Drew took this opportunity to make a couple of points. One was that his brand new camel hair coat was still on the plane because he got off to look for me. 2, the gig we were going to was at the University of Florida at a 9,000 seat basketball arena. This was easily the biggest show we'd ever done. As I began a third round of shouting, pleading with the unhelpful response representative from American Airlines, Drew turned his ear toward me. You couldn't have driven yourself to the damn airport. You had to get a listener to do it. The jacket cost my wife $2,000 and this is the first time I've worn it. It was a gift. Quick side note on gifts. Why does anyone get caught up in that coffee mug was a gift argument? Doesn't that make it more expendable? I fired back at Drew. If we could have just carpooled like human beings, I wouldn't have had to rely on the listener with the heart of gold and the alarm clock of marzipan. As the arguing wore on, I realized the plane and the jetway still had not budged. I pointed out to that bitch with the blue blazer that I could have been on the plane and drunk by now. She repeated for the 14th time, sir, the door has been closed. Then the final indignity. I saw a worker walk out of the jetway. The door had been open since we'd been there. At that point, I went into a fugue state. I don't remember much after that. Just that whatever Drew tells the story he says, I'll keep repeating to her was, get me the guy from the commercial. Get me the super helpful guy that makes everything right. The guy who chases weary travelers through the terminal with the attaché case and mistakenly left behind. That guy. Go get that guy. This argument went on and on while the plane didn't move and the jetway didn't move. It's another one of those letter of the law, spirit of the law arguments. Thank you, dickhead lawyers. The door not opening was no different from the overhead compartment not closing. Almost every form of transportation was improved over the last 40 years. Cars are safer and more comfortable. Trains are faster and less expensive. Even buses have improved. Not counting the whole segregation thing, airline travel is the only mode of transportation we've taken a step backwards in. The passengers dress like defendants on the People's Court. The stewardesses have gotten uglier or gay, and the flight from New York to LA still takes 6 hours. Exactly the same as it did in 1963, except that now you have to go to the airport 2 hours earlier for the prison-style pat-down and delousing. And instead of sitting across from guys with ascots, I'm sitting across from an ass named Scott. Now, I would stay here and talk, but I gotta catch my damn flight and be there 2 hours earlier.